Thank you so much, the FRIBIS team, Professor Neumarker, and thank you all of you for coming for this inauguration. I would also like to remember at this juncture Mr. Werner, who made many things possible, particularly the basic income discussion possible in Germany. Unfortunately, we lost him, but I think what he wanted, I think you are materializing it. So my best wishes to FRIBIS. Okay, let's start with this vision of a basic income society. I'm not an economist, I'm a sociologist, so I would like to see a society which we can call a basic income society. What would it look like? A basic income society is where a basic income is implemented. So it is not, at the moment, it's not anywhere there, but it's a vision that what would it do? It gives a floor to everyone, and basically capitalism, one is not opposed to capitalism, but capitalism that doesn't start at zero. The capitalism we have has many problems, while there are opportunities also. So it doesn't, you don't start with zero. When you fall, you really don't fall rock bottom. And essentially, in fact, I'm going to dwell a lot on this income insecurity. That would be reduced quite substantially in that basic income society, because when you give a basic income to every individual, it's like drip irrigation. You reach out to every single individual. So more than inequality, I'm more interested in the deprivation that happens today in the world. We are depriving a large section of this population in the world of very basics. So that deprivation will be addressed immediately because of basic income. We'll see many other things also. And also the stigma that is associated with welfare would also go away because it's universal. Everybody gets it as a member of the community. It's like a voting right. It's not dole, or it's not charity given to people. And it's a matter of right. Like you breathe air, you also get a basic income to stand on. So it gives a floor to stand on. I think the real cutting edge of basic income is the unconditionality, which many people find it extremely difficult to digest. That whatever you do, I think politicians, policymakers are interested in targeting, identifying groups and say that, okay, we will give you. And then one more group will ask, okay, we will give you. Okay, one more group will ask. So the game should go on. That is where you have the control, you have the power of discretion, you have the power to give. So I think somewhere when you make it unconditional, it completely changes the game. That's the game changer, actually. That is why, even though it's a very simple idea, it's a very radical idea because it is unconditional. Unconditional, we have, I think historically, we have relegated unconditional to the private domain and said, in the public domain, everything has to be transactional, contractual. Contractual, the moment you bring the contractual, the mistrust begins. So it is based on, a society, it is based on, as a society based on trust, not mistrust. So when you trust people, I have seen personally, I have seen it in the pilots that we did. What happens when you trust somebody? It's a very serious psychological question. When you trust somebody, it breeds more trust. So that person, as an individual, and also collectively, when you trust a community, so it breeds more trust, which means that you generate a lot of positive energy in that community. So trust is a very, very important element of the basic income society. So as opposed to the control that we experience. And because it is individual, it grants economic citizenship. You feel that everybody feels that they are part of this economy. It gives you economic citizenship along with political citizenship. So it makes you feel that you are worthy. So it enhances your self-worth, which we have seen it in all the pilots that we are familiar with and we have done it ourselves. And also, finally, the unconditional basic income is also an expression of care, that somebody cares for you, the state cares for you, or more importantly, the community cares for you. Okay? So we are talking about the question of care, that we will come to that in more greater detail. But what is a caring society? What does it look like? I would say a basic income society is a caring society, in the sense that, as you all know, I think to be a caring society is the sign of moral progress of civilization. What is it? What is the sign of a good society? What is the sign of a society where, which is evolved, a more evolved society? A more evolved society, in my view, is one where there is a lot of care at its very foundation. So, and finally, it's also a very simple and a transparent system. Today, with the bureaucracy that we have, the controls, the vigilance that exists today, it's not transparent who will get what. So it is punitive. Whereas here, it's a very transparent system that everybody gets it. Okay? So unlike our current welfare system. So this is it. You no longer need controls, and you move to a society of trust. But do you think this is all utopia? This is all a dream, daydreaming? We are sitting and just fantasizing about a society. It should be like this. Is it just good for a nice evening talk? No. I feel, this is my proposition, that basic income is a necessity. It's not a luxury, it's not a utopia. It is not a fancy idea of daydreamers, but it is a necessity. And I'm going to defend this by, there are 4 reasons why it is a necessity. I will not go in detail into all of them, but the first one I would like to go into much detail. And the others I will mention, because I'm mentioning all the 4 crises, because that is the big picture. And unless basic income movement, unless basic income idea relates to all this, we will be talking only about a scheme. Because I'm not looking at basic income as a scheme or just as a policy, but I'm looking at it as an ethos of a particular society, as a central governing principle of a particular society. Okay. Now, if you see the evidence of what kind of work is going to be there in future, what is the future of work? You have some reports, I'll go into these reports, that what is the employment scenario going to be next 20, 30 years? In fact, the future is not about future, it's actually the future is now. We are already in that future, experiencing. If you look at this report, it says basically what are the main drivers of change. We are already experiencing this. This is high-speed mobile internet. Today we can't live without internet. It's become so much part of our life. The artificial intelligence, big data analytics, we all know what is this big data. And then the cloud technology. These are going to these are the main drivers of change in the kind of business models that are being developed now. I think since the 90s, we have seen massive shift, since the 80s actually, a massive shift in the manufacturing systems in the world. The way they have become, the whole idea was to make it more flexible. Okay, so to improve their businesses and stay in the market, I think companies will adopt newer technologies, and definitely they will rely more on machines than on human beings. They would like to. They would modify their geographical base and operations. You can send all manufacturing to China, or China may send part of it to Vietnam, or you can manufacture anywhere, wherever the costs are less. So that is the most important thing. But also at the same time, even if they go and manufacture in a particular country, it's not that they will stay there forever. If they find a newer place which is less expensive and the costs are low, so that also can go there. So today, I think it's that kind of flexibility one is asking. Those are the business models. So do everything possible to achieve flexibility in operations. Now, the projections are the global average skill stability is about 58%, which means that 58% of the global workforce, there is some kind of a stability about their skills. Now, 42% of workforce, the skills need to be changed. I mean, this is really massive. Like nearly half of the global workforce, you have to change your skills. You have to enhance your skills because you are no longer needed. Your old skills are no longer useful. So you have to now change. Now ask a 50-year-old how much of reskilling, we keep talking about reskilling, but tell me a 50-year-old truck driver, you think he will change and go and become a carpenter? Or go and become a tailor? Impossible. So I think there are limits to reskilling. I think in general, I think the corporate world, we keep talking about reskilling, but by 2022 already, I think this report was written in 2018, 54% of the workforce will require reskilling. Now, you have to go into the demographics of this 54%. How many would like to reskill themselves? How many have the capacity to reskill themselves? How many of them have the readiness to reskill themselves? Now, what is going to happen if they don't reskill themselves? If you unpack that question, it's a very, very serious question, and what it is going to do to the society that we are living in. So the dominant HR strategy of all companies are to hire new workforce. Definitely new workforce, because the aged workforce gets more pay because of the number of years. So if you get rid of one senior worker, from the company's point of view, you can have 3 young people whom you can pay very less at the starting level. And also, they have more energy. You can squeeze more out of them. So look at the advantages. That's how the HR strategy is looked at. Now, the projection is that workforce of high-value creative jobs to be retrained rather than low-end repetitive or automatable jobs, which means that most of the automatable jobs, most of the repetitive things will be completely automated. Now, only the high-end, because they would like to invest only in the high-end senior managers or something like that. Now, let's look at the McKinsey's report. Okay, McKinsey has to give a positive tone. These days, everything has to be positive. So they have added jobs gained. But jobs lost, jobs gained, it makes a nice phrase. But how many jobs will be there, the new jobs will be created, how many jobs will be lost is a big question if you unpack that. Now, this projection is very interesting that 60% of occupations will have at least 30% of their work activities to be automated, which means 60% of occupations, 6 out of 10 occupations, this many will be automated. Half of all work activities globally, the technical potential to be automated. Half of all work activities. Today we are talking about, Elon Musk wants to build houses on Mars. And his plan is that he will have, it won't be people who will be building those houses on Mars. He will have robots, and then there will be self-replicating robots. So one robo will be made into 2, 2 into 4, 4 into 8, and they will build the houses. So that is the kind of a vision Elon Musk has. So you can imagine that even the construction industry is going to be more and more automated. And then a survey of 46 countries shows that up to 35% work activities to be displaced, and advanced countries to be more affected. What Professor Neumarker was mentioning, that today we are not talking about just developing countries there, but it's something that is like pandemic has affected all of us. It's going to affect all of us everywhere. So 75 to 375 million workers need to switch occupational categories. They have to switch from one occupational category to another. So you can see the massiveness. I don't want to go into the numbers so much. The demand for high-wage occupations grows, and demand for low and middle-wage occupations will decline. Now, majority of the population is in the middle and the lower occupations rather than high-end occupations. Now, if you see these transitions, let's not go into the whole thing, but just the priority of policymakers will be economic growth, skill upgrade, fluid labor market, that's the requirement, and the transition support. Okay, let's not spend too much time on this here. Now, what is really happening at a global level is the temporary or casualization of labor, which means that a permanent job, a full-time job, a permanent worker with a stable job is an endangered species today. After a point, I think you will not find them, because everybody, now I think it's all short-term contracts. If you see these different types, which I picked up from the ILO, there is a temporary employment, there is part-time or on-call work, like Uber drivers and all that, multi-party employment relationship, and disguised employment. All kinds of different forms are coming. Basically, the point is that no employer would like to have the liability of an employee, the lifetime liability of an employee. Everything has to be short-term. And look at something like an Uber driver. Uber driver, the drivers used to be workers. They used to be called workers. They used to work. They were employees, and they had a contract with their company. But today, they are not called workers. They are called business associates or business partners, and their level is enhanced. But they're also the most precarious of all, if you see their situation. So there's a whole new grammar. This is not any, not very new, but it has been around for a long time. So this is a new grammar that is going to get more and more intensified. If you see the ILO's assessment that 75% of the global workforce is on temporary contracts, and only 25% have secure jobs. And you can imagine that these secure jobs are at a high level. I'll give an example of the Indian workforce. That's why I'm saying it's not so new. In India, it's only just 6% is in the so-called formal sector. And you can see that total workforce is about 500 million, half a billion. And you can see organized sector employment. By organized sector employment, I mean you have a contract, and it's a stable job. So even in that, you can see that bulk of it is the government employment. But now you also see within the government a lot of casualization happening. Government also is employing people on short-term, very short-term contracts. So, I just want to point out that 94% are the vulnerable, insecure category. I'm also giving you another small example of a smaller country in our neighbor, Nepal. You can see that just the formal wage public is only 2% of the working population. You can see on top. And formal wage, 1% in the private sector. And this bulk of that population, 60% is unpaid workers. By that, what I mean is they are subsistence farmers. They work on their farms and then consume that. They are not in the they are not in the labor market. They don't sell. So this is, look at, I made this as part of identifying vulnerability. What is the vulnerability index of Nepal? We are working with the government there, that this is how vulnerable the unemployed are there, the informal wage are there, the farmers are there, the self-employed non-farmer, and the unpaid subsistence farmers. So that is the kind of vulnerability you are talking about. Now, what kind of policies do you think the government should have in order to address that vulnerability? Okay, we are breaking our heads with the government there to say that, bulk of your population, like in India, bulk of the population is vulnerable. What is the future of any stable livelihood that you can think of? Okay, it's not just the story of the global south. I was quite shocked and surprised to see that even in Europe, I think there is a lot of insecurity, about income insecurity. This Eurofound survey, I think the data is from 2016. It says that 1% of the population feels highest levels of security on all the 5 parameters. They have measured it on 5 parameters, that is personal security, housing security, healthcare security, employment security, and old age income security. So I think it was quite a massive exercise they did. 12% feel some level of insecurity on all 5 types. There is some insecurity on all the 5. Insecurity quite widespread among the well-off sections also, which is very, very interesting. And 10% enjoy highest level of employment security, which means the 2 questions were asked about employment security. How likely that you will lose your job? And how likely that you will find a similar job? Those were the 2 questions. So 10% enjoy highest levels of employment security, only 10%, which means people in good jobs, high positions also feel that you can see that they're insecure. There is insecurity. Workers with permanent contracts enjoy highest security. Even among them, 25% do not rule out the possibility of losing their job in the next 6 months. So this is the kind of the projections that we have today, which means that we are rapidly moving towards a gig economy, which means my summary is that at the end of the day, let's boil it down to a very simplistic classification. All that you're going to have tomorrow or today already, there will be good jobs and there will be bad jobs. And there will be small number of good jobs and massive number of, what do we mean by a bad job? Bad job is where you have income insecurity and all its consequences. Yeah, sounds very cheerful, right? Very depressing. But then I'm not talking out of my hat. All projections show that we are moving towards a society which is very insecure. Now, what kind of a welfare system we have to address that? Are we prepared? Do we have a system to address these questions? I think the current welfare system is based on an assumption, a post-war assumption that there will be full employment, and those who are exceptions, we will give social safety nets so that they don't fall. Now, where is it? Now, the exception today is on the other side, that people who have stable jobs are an exception today by all the data that we have in front of us. Now, which means that the old welfare system is not addressing any of this, neither in the present nor in the future, which only means that we really have to rework, revise everything and innovate a different kind of response to the kind of vulnerabilities that are going to present themselves in future. A fundamental question that we need to ask in order to innovate is, who cares for you from birth to death? A very simple fundamental question, that who is the one, which institution, or who cares? Whose responsibility is it to care for you? Okay? I mean, this is Ian Go's model. Ian Go or Jeff Wood, I think together they wrote this nice book in 2004. I've taken it from them. Okay, you have the family initially. You can see here, you have the family looking after you till you get your education, and then you join the labor market, and then you get out of the labor market, you're in old age, you get a pension, you may not get a pension, whatever. Basically, these are the four institutional mechanisms we have. Now, there is the family, there is the government, there's the market, and there is community. By community, I mean any voluntary, maybe UN kind of work or non-profit work, or anybody, or even maybe communities itself, they have their own local organizations, welfare organizations. Now, you can see from this matrix what has been happening since the 80s. More and more government wants to offload to the market. So, market is very cruel. In the sense, it looks at people in two categories, the losers and the winners and the losers. To the winners, it has a plan, but to the losers, it doesn't have a plan. Okay? But there will be losers. Now, because everybody can't win. But government is a very clever player in this. It tries to balance and tries to please both the market as well as the general population. And that's why all politicians are so tricky. But more and more government, we have seen it during the pandemic, government tries to push things either into the market or to the family, and tries to reduce its own liability. And today we are living through some kind of market fundamentalism, saying that market will look after everything, which it doesn't. And the family is bound by the biological ties and bonding. Culturally, you are bound to look after each other, look after your family members. But it takes the burden in societies that have strong institutions of family. So we have seen during the pandemic that bulk of the burden was taken by the family. Families got indebted. They had to borrow, because when an individual gets bankrupt, it's the family becomes the cushion for the individual. But when the family gets bankrupt, what do? You just go and borrow. So indebtedness will increase. Okay, so in this matrix, the question is how much the government is willing to take the responsibility. We are saying that government should take the responsibility to create the basic conditions of life, basic material conditions of life in terms of universal basic income. So that is the most important thing. And that actually then, I think people will have an opportunity to participate or not participate in the labor market. So it's up to them, the choice is to them. In fact, I think here in Europe, you are talking about a high enough basic income. But I think in Global South, one is not talking about high enough basic income. We're talking about starting at a low level and progressively increasing it. Because the kind of issues it is supposed to address in developing countries and developed countries are slightly different. Not so different, actually, but slightly different. Now, what did pandemic teach us? I think pandemic has really taught us how vulnerable, how fragile large sections of population are. This is a picture of migrant workers leaving the cities and walking back home in India. You could see thousands and thousands of people walking back home because the market abandoned them. The employers abandoned them. They said that okay, for 1 month we will look after you, we will give you a house, we'll give you some rice, but beyond that, I have no responsibility. With such widespread employment insecurity, now this is Professor Guy Standing's thesis, that it creates a new class of people who live very precarious lives, and he calls them precariat. Now, what is more important than as a class, but what is more important is that these are people with a precariatized mind. By precariatized mind, I mean that you are very uncertain. You can see the latest Human Development Report. The title itself is Uncertain Times, Unsettled Lives. So that shows the spirit of the times, that this is what exactly we feel today, that you're going to have a mass of people with precariatized mind, unstable future. They don't have an occupational narrative. They do gig jobs here, and they manage their lives. Some people do 2-3 jobs. That is the kind. Now, what does it give rise to in a society? What kind of consequences will it have when the bulk of the population is of that kind? It gives rise to very unhealthy populism and unscrupulous leaders. We are seeing in various countries a lot of right-wing leaders banking on playing with the emotions of this large section of people, of the voters, and that is one consequence which Guy Standing talks about, that it produces this kind of people, and it generates mental health issues, and suicide rates go up, and crime rates rise, and domestic violence will increase. Social stability is threatened, and excessive burden on families. That is what that is the crisis that one is talking about, and this is the kind of new class structure that Guy talks about. That you will have the mass of the precariat and the receding old working class, and then you have at the top the real elite and the salariat, which is also shrinking over time. It will shrink, and the proficients, like people who are like professionals. Now, the question I think one is asking is that what are the consequences of this new class structure? I will not go more into it, but I just want to indicate that this is the kind of the economic situation, the income insecurity will lead to a socio-political crisis, and this is probably, we need a new social contract. Okay, I will move to the next crisis that I would like to highlight. Is an important crisis, which is an ethical crisis that even advanced capitalist societies or so-called developed societies are all going through, that capitalism and its ethos and its consequences is creating a certain life for us, and it is determining. So which means that you work hard, you earn more money, you buy more things, and keep going. Now, what exactly is the meaning of life that this society is generating? Where is it directing all of us? I think this is a very important question, that is it consumption and more consumption? So you can see that, this is a much larger question. We can't go into the whole thing here, but there seems to be a consumerism trap. There is a growth trap. So I'll just raise some of these questions and for your consideration. That David Graeber talks very interestingly about the bullshit jobs that we all do. And is our life divided between boring jobs and leisure activity? Is that the binary to compensate for it? I mean, you have boring job and you have leisure to compensate for it. So does our self-worth come only from paid work and not from all other activity of life? Is that the only identity we have? Does leisure mean more consumption? Or leisure can be a withdrawal from consumption? I think those questions we need to ask. Has economic growth become a monster that we must constantly feed? Now the question, the irony of our situation is that we all want growth. Unless there is growth, there can't be the economy. Now that growth demands that consumption will increase. So it's a vicious cycle that we have gotten into, but the question is that how does one get out of that vicious cycle? At the same time, run the economy. Okay, so all of us are in this together. I mean, there's no need to classify the world into the developed world and the developing world. I think the only question we can ask is that, is a better life possible? Now, what is it that in a basic income society it will do to people to give a different meaning of life? Is that possible? Or is it a long shot that I am? So these are all just troubling questions for which we don't have answers. But then we know the minimum we need, but do we know the maximum we need? I think those are the questions, these are very serious questions we have. Now, the last crisis is the ecological and extinction crisis. I think all of us know about it, but here also I have just a few questions. In addition to this, I would also like to add one more thing about the coalition of the pharmaceutical industry and the food industry. I think those have very serious consequences for that. We do not have much time to go into that. So, okay, what is it that we get, what now? We have these 4 crises. Now, is basic income going to solve all these problems? Definitely not. Basic income is probably the first step towards a better society. Okay, but this is the big picture. So I feel that the basic income movement, basic income scholars have to connect with all these crises. We can't do it in isolation. We can't talk about basic income in isolation. We need to take into account and be connected with all the different movements that are there. Only then we will be able to create a better society. So these are completely, you can see that one is linked to other. They're interrelated. What seems to be common at the center seems to be our capitalist way of doing things, capitalist way of organizing our society. But that seems to be at the center. But is it possible to tame that capitalism to benefit our sections of population, or is it not possible at all? I think this has been a question for a long, long time, several centuries. So, but the fact that all these are interrelated, that the economic insecurity gives rise to socio-political crisis, and that gives rise to various other things also. Okay, now I would just leave it at that. But then is everything so hopeless? But I feel that there are opportunities with technology. This is a very interesting quotation I like. Everyone can enjoy, this is Stephen Hawking talking about artificial intelligence. Everyone can enjoy a life of luxurious leisure if the machine-produced wealth is shared, or most people can end up miserably poor if the machine owners successfully lobby against wealth redistribution. So far, the trend seems to be towards the second option, with technology driving ever-increasing inequality. So the question is that automation, can it be turned into an opportunity? Can the robots become the new slaves that will serve mankind? Why not? That will be the new slavery that we will see. And robots don't mind to be slaves at all. So I think it can be converted. It is possible to convert these things. Technology need not be just a threat. It can be converted into a positive thing for people. So if technology can produce wealth on its own, I mean, my colleague in BN, Hilda Latour, she talks about self-owning machines. Machines own themselves. I mean, nobody owns them. The self-owning machines, they produce wealth on their own. Like I said, they're self-replicating robots making buildings on Mars. So there can be self-owning machines, and those machines produce wealth, and I think all of us can live a better life. Is it not possible? But the machine owners, at the moment, all machines are owned by some people or the other, though will they allow that? I think those are the questions of the larger power structures of the world, but we need to confront them. But it's important to see that as an opportunity, and it is possible to have that better society. I will end there. Thank you so much.